I hate telling stories, but I understand that it's necessary to do so in order to talk about the event I want to share. What I look like and what Stephanie looks like doesn't matter. Use your imagination to fill these gaps with yourself and the love of your life. Stephanie and I found each other mutually attractive. What sparked between us wasn't based on appearance, a big phallus, or a tight butt. This story is about love. I'm married to Stephanie. Others called her Steph, but I never did. I found the name beautiful. She also called me Robert, although everyone else called me just Bob. Our pet names for each other were our official names. This part will become important later. My hobby is astronomy. I love looking at the stars, as well as the planets of our solar system. I have a whole assortment of telescopes. Some people have lots of weapons, some have lots of vinyl records. I have a bunch of telescopes. I acquire new ones just like anyone who likes the latest version of their favorite things, striving to get the newest modification. If you had asked me a few months ago if anything was wrong in our marriage, I would have told you, yes, damn it. Something hasn't been right lately. Stephanie and I have been married for 3 years. We discussed the appropriate time to have children. We had a wonderful moment when we both decided it was time. For 2 months, that's all we talked about. And then, she suddenly didn't want to talk about it anymore. Our sex life, which had been insanely exciting with the anticipation of having a baby, didn't return to what it used to be. It became more like a routine. It wasn't cold. Sex seemed mutually satisfying, but there was no passion. And then, 3 weeks ago, sex just stopped altogether. I assumed it was because of female problems that I could never understand, or because she changed her mind. Both of my theories were wrong. I returned from work at my usual time. There was nothing that really suggested what was supposed to happen next. There was no strange car in the driveway. A stranger's car was parked on the street, but I only realized that later. I entered to see my wife and a man I had never seen before on our couch. Usually, I would call it a couch, but what I saw is the reason I describe it differently. They were sitting together, holding hands. It was unusual. Stephanie usually let me know when someone was visiting us. I hoped it was some distant relative I had never met. Hello, dear, will someone join us for dinner tonight? Stephanie said, Robert, please, have a seat. I need to tell you something. I sat down in the chair across from the couch. It was strange, but I didn't expect it to be the only strange thing I would have to deal with. It was before Stephanie spoke again. We fell in love with each other, Stephanie said. All right, that settled all my doubts. I fell silent for a moment, digesting this. While I did, she looked at the strange man. She looked at him the same way she used to look at me. He looked at her exactly the same way. There was no doubt she was telling the truth. I had only one question. So I asked it. Who the hell is Hadel? The man I mistook for Hadel spoke up. It's me. I know it's awkward for both of you. I'm here only to ease the pain of this revelation. It's painful for her. Obviously, easing the pain meant easing only Stephanie's pain. My pain didn't diminish at all. So it didn't really help. Stephanie spoke next. I met Hadel at work. I didn't want this to happen, but it just did. I genuinely thought I was calm when I said, how does something like this just happen? Hadel stood up boldly and loudly said, don't raise your voice at her. She's an angel. Stephanie stared at him intensely and said, thank you, Pike. I'm always here for you, Pike Hunter. Pike? Pike Hunter? I was stunned. It was like a brain collision. I used that word from my own experience of playing rugby. What I felt was akin to getting kneed in the head. I was completely disoriented. My next words reflected this. I composed my emotions again and said calmly, maybe there's a way we could work this out. I've read stories about women who can be in love with 2 people at the same time. There's a romantic story where a woman was in love with 2 men. We should read it together before making any hasty decisions. Hadel rose from the couch. Stop barking at her. Stop tormenting this wonderful woman. Stephanie grabbed him by the arms and pushed him back onto the couch. Thank you for defending me, my knight. Then she kissed him. A light kiss on the lips, which previously meant nothing. Then she looked at me with a mixture of suffering and sorrow. I can't love 2 men. It's not for me. I can only give my heart to one person at a time. I fell out of love with you just as I fell in love with Hadel. Can't we talk about this? We could go to counseling. Hadel squeezed her hand when she answered. That would only prolong the pain. Robert, my heart knows what it wants. I still love you and always will. I just don't love you in the same way anymore. Ending the relationship will be the easiest way for both of us. But we planned to have children just a few months ago. I don't understand. Stephanie looked at me with all the pain in the world. That's why I had to do it. I want our children to be conceived in love. Hadel spoke again. They will be our beloved babies. Oh, Pike, she replied. Then they gently leaned their foreheads against each other. I really didn't think they could do anything more repulsive if they tried. I was about to speak when Stephanie looked at me and spoke first. Robert, I know this is hard, and I thank you for supporting me in what I know is a painful moment for you. I'll come back later to get my things, and I really hope we can talk as friends. I still wondered how my composed behavior somehow translated as supportive, while they both stood up and left. I certainly didn't support any of this. I suppose they said what they needed to save face. Hadel got into his car, and she got into hers. Of course, it was practical since she needed her car. Nonetheless, I don't think I could have handled seeing them drive off together. I always thought I had a very good memory. That night felt more like a curse. I replayed everything Stephanie had told me over the past 6 months in my head. I had never heard of Hadel. I had no idea who he was. She fell in love with someone else and started a romance, and I had never had the slightest clue about it. How could I have missed that? Certainly, there were signs, as I mentioned earlier, that something was off. Now I could put all these things into context. She fell out of love with me, which explained her rejection of sex. She completely shut me out of her bed for the past 3 weeks. I came to the conclusion that it was roughly around the time when she and Hadel fulfilled their mutual desire. She said she could only have one love at a time. It was probably then that she gave him her heart and body. I was still trying to make sense of it all when I got a call from the hospital. Stephanie had been in another car accident. Yes, another one. Stephanie was always too impatient. A year ago, she rear-ended someone while returning from work when traffic suddenly stopped. Physically, she was fine, but emotionally, she was shaken. She lost consciousness when the airbag deployed. She wasn't even hospitalized because of it. This time was more serious. They took her to the hospital because she was unconscious when paramedics found her. I was told she ran a red light at full speed, then swerved to avoid an oncoming car. Eventually, she crashed into the side of a roadside cafe. Obviously, this information came from Hadel. Of course, he didn't call me or inform me about it. I received this information from the staff. I was still pondering the avalanche of information when Hadel approached me. Yes, he was there too. He got there before me, but I hadn't seen him until then. He didn't express mutual grief or offer any unwelcome embrace. He didn't say anything like, "Hi," or "Let's talk." He just went straight to the point. "Bob, I can't see her since I'm not a family member. You know she left you for me, so I'd appreciate it if you let me in. You should approve of this. Technically, I'm not family, but I'm her family." Technically? Given such an approach, I gave my response. It was straightforward. No. If I were you, I'd let her go. I'd like to move on. Let me comfort her. No. Are you really going to be an asshole at a time like this? With those words, I turned my back on him and headed to Stephanie's room. He was definitely right. I had been acting like a jerk. I didn't feel guilty about it in the slightest. I had barely managed to cope with the pain when Stephanie announced she was leaving. I hadn't even had time to reach the anger stage. Seeing Nigel and hearing him out had turned sorrow into anger. I couldn't lash out at my wife after she had been in an accident. So being a jerk to Nigel at the moment wouldn't hurt. I needed answers, and I hoped to get them. Until I did, Pukey wouldn't get near her. The fact that he felt pain was somewhat soothing to me at that moment. I was intercepted by Dr. Beller. He looked like a wise and experienced doctor. His gray hair reassured me that he was a source of knowledge. He told me that my wife likely had amnesia, judging by what he could tell. Otherwise, she was physically fine, just like in the previous road incident. But with her head, however, this time was different. Except for soap operas, I had no idea what that actually meant. What I learned from the TV was that I should hit her on the head again to bring back her memories. Soon enough, I realized that soap operas should not be considered a source of medical knowledge. Dr. Beller looked very much like a doctor when he explained this to me. "She has retrograde amnesia," he said. "I didn't know there were different types," I replied. "There's also a version called anterograde amnesia. People with it can't form new memories. Have you ever seen a movie called 50 First Dates? Yeah, it's actually a criminally underrated Adam Sandler movie. All Adam Sandler movies are underrated. Well, let's agree to disagree on that one. There was no point in annoying him. After all, he was her doctor. So, if she doesn't have that kind of amnesia, what type does my wife have? He's one of the types that most people are familiar with. She can't remember anything after a certain point. She'll still create new memories. Is it permanent? It rarely happens that way. Memories usually come back. It's extremely rare that they never resurface again. How long will it take for her memory to come back? It varies. It could happen this week. It could take a year. It could take even longer. So, she could just suddenly remember everything at any moment? That's entirely possible. It could also happen that she starts remembering certain things, but not everything. She gradually remembers more and more things. So, you're saying you really have no idea what's going to happen. That's exactly what I'm saying. Also, you should give Mommy's Boy another chance. Adam Sandler is a comedic genius. I will do that. Clearly, these days anyone can become a doctor. Hence the faith in gray hair. I was allowed to visit my wife. She was alert and wary, but also confused. Robert, what happened? Doctors are telling me I was just in an accident. I grabbed her outstretched hand, and she squeezed mine. I squeezed out in reply. What's the last thing you remember? I was driving home from the office. The car in front of me stopped, but I didn't hit the brakes in time. Her memories seemed to revert to the unfortunate accident that happened a year ago, before all this. It was before Hadel, as far as I understood. I also wondered about her memories returning to another unfortunate incident. Did she have some serious injury then that the doctors didn't detect? Or was it just a coincidence? These thoughts were to be discussed with the doctors another time. Or maybe not. Right now, I was preoccupied with something else. Stephanie, you were in another accident on the day you left me. I left you? Why would I even do that? You told me you were in love with Nigel. Nigel? Who the hell is Nigel? He's someone you know from work. I don't know anyone from work named Nigel. That was interesting. Either Nigel was a newcomer there, or she lied to me about how they met. Listen, I don't want to upset you. We can talk about this some other time. You can't just drop a bomb like that and not talk about it. My first thought was, that's exactly what you did to me, you bitch. There was no point in saying that or retaliating against her for something she didn't remember. I chose the longer route. Though, with difficulty, I told her the whole story just as I heard it from her. She interrupted me several times and came close to accusing me of lying. She seemed unable to grasp anything I was saying. Again, that's exactly how I felt when she and Nigel confessed their mutual love to me earlier that day. She was full of questions I couldn't help but answer, like, did you cheat on me? No, Stephanie, I never did and never will. Did you, hit me or something? Same answer as last time. Then why would I do this for no reason? I kissed her hand. Stephanie, just calm down. We have time to talk about this. I'm glad you're okay. Stephanie was kept in the hospital for several days while doctors ran tests. I was there every day after work. So was Nigel. Every time I walked in, he would say something like, Bob, can we talk? Nope, Bob, you know that. No. Eventually, Stephanie was allowed to go home. We were both briefed on what to expect. Stephanie was okay both mentally and physically. Her memories would likely return, maybe slowly, maybe all at once. I'd heard this before. She'd heard it before. At that moment, Stephanie just wanted to go home. So did I. So, we nodded, agreed, and signed all the forms without reading them, just to get the hell out of there. While we nodded and signed, Dr. Beller mentioned that she might go back to work, but her memory loss might make it difficult to perform her duties. He suggested she might want to find another job in a similar field. I simply said, thank you, Dr. Beller, for everything you've done. We want to go home right away. 5 minutes later, we did just that. That night, we slept snugly in each other's arms. I didn't want to let her go. It felt like a piece of me had been torn away and suddenly restored. I never wanted to lose it again. I slept more soundly since all this began. When I woke up, we were still entwined. Though I felt relieved when my beloved was safe under our roof again, it didn't mean I felt completely at ease. From what Dr. Beller said, this situation could change at any time. I wasn't sure how large the window was in which I had to find a permanent solution, but now I had a second chance, and I wasn't going to just squander it, doing nothing while the clock ticked. Of course, there were deep philosophical questions to consider. For instance, if Stephanie could fall out of love with me so quickly once, did I really want her back? Things like, should I look a gift horse in the mouth? I never really dabbled in philosophy, so I pushed aside those thoughts and focused on the task at hand. I needed to get Nigel off the stage before I could think of anything else. This problem was tricky enough. Stephanie wouldn't have considered leaving her job. She loved her work. She was good at it. She called her boss and explained the situation with her memory. Her boss showed sympathy and welcomed her back. She assured her that everything would work out. I seemed to support her return, but I still knew nothing about Nigel. Many affairs start right at work. From what little I knew, it seemed like the same situation here. It would definitely be a problem if he really was someone she worked with. If Nigel was her colleague, she would come across him again. If that were the case, there was a chance he could worm his way back into her heart. She returned to work despite my reservations. It seemed like she was honest with me about how they met. Nigel really was a colleague. Stephanie told me she received a warm welcome. It seemed like everyone wanted to do everything possible to help her. They were all informed about her memory loss. Only one person made her feel uncomfortable: Nigel. His way of welcoming her back was different. He kept wanting to talk to her alone and continued to violate her physical boundaries, which was uncomfortable coming from a colleague, let alone a stranger. She received plenty of hugs, but Nigel was the only one who sniffed her hair. Stephanie told me she quickly drew the line. It seemed like he didn't heed the warning. He always wanted to hold her hand or hug her. All of this only angered Stephanie. In the company where she worked, there was no policy against relationships between coworkers. Fortunately for me, there was indeed a strict policy against sexual harassment. I understand what I said, fortunately for me. I still wasn't ready to think, fortunately for us. Not yet. Nigel was called into a meeting with our, where the company's standard lecture on policy was given, and he was told to cease and desist. He also received a warning from his boss, instructing him to stop harassing Stephanie. Nigel didn't stop. The first thing he did after being warned was to confront Stephanie in front of a crowd of witnesses. Instead of speaking, he grabbed her and started kissing her. I suppose he expected muscle memory or something of the sort to lead to her kissing him back, not the subsequent slap and kick to the groin. Nigel was dismissed for cause. That didn't stop him from trying to see her. He would show up in the parking lot at her workplace. He would appear when she went out for lunch. Things got so bad that she obtained a restraining order against him. This greatly eased my concerns about the affair reigniting. It's hard to engage in a romance from 500 feet away. I really enjoyed seeing my wife's lover suffer. I also enjoyed rekindling the relationship with my wife that I thought we'd always had. Stephanie had returned for the time being, but I knew it could change if her memories returned. Even if it didn't, could something in her nature suddenly make her feel the same about another man? One night, I was stargazing on the balcony with one of my old telescopes. I did this from time to time because I liked to think of myself as Galileo and see if I could see what he saw. I couldn't make the same conclusions he did, but I wished I could. When I was feeling down, I aimed the telescope at the surroundings, as I often did. Damn me if I didn't see Nigel lurking in the bushes. Stephanie stepped out onto the balcony and asked what I was looking at. I simply told her to look through the telescope. Wow, that's some serious shit. Should I call the police? Oh, no. He wants to see something. Let's give him something to see. What do you mean? I want him to see me making love to you. I want him to know that you're mine. He'll see us naked. You told me he's already seen you naked. No, only you have seen me naked. I don't think he's ever seen me naked. Then it's time for him to see it. I want him to see something he'll never be able to compete with. Let's show him something from me that he'll never get and never see again. Let's show him two people in love like he'll never see. Let's talk about pressure. It was supposed to be hard for me. It wasn't. Her enthusiasm was contagious. Damn, it was hot. Years had passed since our prelude was so intense. We kissed, caressed each other tenderly, then kissed again and again. At that moment, I had no idea if Nigel was still watching us or not. I hoped he was. I didn't care anymore. We were both in the present moment, enjoying each other's touches and tastes like we hadn't in years. Stephanie doesn't make noise when we have sex. She just makes quiet sounds. If she ever speaks during sex, it's usually quiet one-word statements like, yes. I talk more than she does. I can utter up to 3 words. You're beautiful, or, Stephanie, my Stephanie. Tonight, we're going to put on a show. We started slowly, both knowing we were being watched. Soft touches with lips and fingertips. Quiet whispers of approval. We both gasped. We both breathed in, still gazing into each other's eyes. Stephanie leaned in and bit my lip. I enveloped her mouth with my tongue, allowing Stephanie to slowly descend onto me. Faster, she said, rising on her toes. A slight pain added a delightful counterpoint to our connection. Someone moaned. I heard Stephanie breathing heavily, her legs moving up and down heavily. She held on tightly, tilting her head back. I could see our skin, glistening with sweat in the moonlight. I felt anticipation in both of us as we approached climax. A quiet mew escaped Stephanie's throat. Stephanie grabbed my chin and shouted, "Give us a baby." Nigel screamed, "No, we must have our children, our children." Obviously, this was the straw that broke the camel's back for Nigel. He chose this moment to burst out of hiding. "Pocahontas, please, stop, I love you." At that moment, we paid no attention to it anymore. At that moment, nothing was more desired by me than experiencing an orgasm. Judging by her facial expression, she wanted the same. I can always tell when she's in the moment. She never looks at me. Her eyes look anywhere but at me. Realizing his words were barely audible, Nigel decided to make a nonverbal statement with action. This statement was made by breaking our glass door. He could have just opened the door. It wasn't locked. I assumed he wanted to find out without wasting time. I like to think we both climaxed when we heard the glass shatter. I didn't even bother to get dressed and rushed downstairs. Contrary to what we see in movies, throwing your body full force into a window doesn't go unnoticed. Judging by the screams, it also seems quite painful. Nigel was in a hellish mess. He was halfway in and halfway out, stuck in the frame and desperately trying to free himself from the glass. I grabbed his hand and pulled him inside. He screamed again. His clothes were torn, and there were lacerations all over his exposed flesh. Instead of thanking me, he shouted, "Get your hands off me." He lay sprawled on the floor. He really seemed indifferent to the fact that he was bleeding and leaving stains. The area was tiled, but it would still need cleaning. I called 911. At the time, I thought it was for urgent medical assistance. Nigel looked like he lost a battle with a chainsaw. However, after talking to the 911 operator, I realized I was also reporting a crime. I lived in a city where reporting a crime could lead to the person reporting it being arrested or shot. Let's just call this city Baltimore. It was one of those situations where I could have been handcuffed and spent the night in a cell because the police simply arrested everyone at the scene and let the legal system sort out the incident. I didn't even touch him after pulling him in. 2 police officers arrived. One of them was quite a big and imposing guy. The other was a smaller woman, and I had a feeling you wouldn't want to mess with her. While Nigel and I were ordered to lie down and not move, Nigel once again tipped the scales in my favor. As they handcuffed both of us, he shouted to Stephanie, "Pocahontas, I'll come back to save you." The larger policeman was Officer White Cloud. That was all he and his partner needed to hear. I really hoped he would eventually get promoted and become Chief White Cloud. When the dust settled, the court ruled that Nigel had violated the restraining order. Additionally, he was guilty of breaking and entering. Nigel was going to disappear from our lives for a while. It didn't help when Officer White Cloud took a stance where he mentioned Pocahontas in front of the most liberal judge who could preside over this case. Did I mention the judge was also a woman who hated harassment? At that moment, I wanted to kiss her, but I didn't want to tempt fate. Nigel ended up in jail. Oh, not forever. He got a sentence of 2 years and served 3 months. Still, it was unexpectedly harsh. Now he was a criminal. That would mark his future. It seemed he finally got the message because there was no more contact from Pookie. That was one problem that could be put to rest. But there was still a time bomb ticking, bringing back her memories. Selfishly, I didn't want that to happen. Considering how she felt about Nigel now, I didn't think it would be good for her either. Nevertheless, we had to move forward, ready for it. I had no doubt that if it ever happened, we would face it together. I also had no doubt that it would be a complication we didn't need. And with that, my story ends. I believe they lived happily ever after. This story is best appreciated as the humorous tale it should be. Nonetheless, I understand that some readers may consider this story unfinished because the reasons for this romance were never explained. I didn't explain it because I don't know the reason. I used a combination of real-life experiences to describe Stephanie's thoughts when she decided to leave him. I know this, simply from my own life experience, as well as talking to women and men. The explanation, "I just fell in love with him," has happened more than once. If someone finds this story incomplete, I already know in my mind what will happen if she regains her memories. It will still be a happy ending, one that will include therapy, counseling, and arguments.
Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. And we'll see you on the Cheating Secrets channel.